Hello, everyone. My name is Eileen Contreras, and I am Logarithm's Digital Marketing Specialist. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, In the News, Part 5. I'd like to welcome back Jake Haldeman and Mike V from the Logarithm Channel's sales team. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items before handing things over to our speakers. There are a couple of things for you to keep in mind throughout our broadcast. First, everyone is muted to ensure audio quality. With that said, we're here to answer any questions you might have. So if there's anything you'd like to ask our panelists related to today's topic, please feel free to send questions through the chat feature at any time. We build in time specifically for Q&A at the end of the presentation, but again, you're welcome to submit questions at any time. Lastly, I'd like to direct your attention to the attachment section of this broadcast. We've included several additional free resources for you to download. So please check them out, and we hope they're useful to you. Our agenda today is pretty straightforward. Jake and Mike are going to go over the latest cybersecurity news impacting the security industry. With that, I'll pass it over to our speakers. Mike and Jake, over to you.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having us back. It's been a while since we've done this, Jake.
Yeah, it's been a few months, hasn't it, Mike?
It has been. We're happy to be brought back and invited to this.
It's good to know they wanted us back. We didn't get fired.
Yeah, exactly right. Pretty good trend to have. Hey, I wanted to kick it off and just ask a quick question, kind of a rhetorical question, if you will. But I wanted to ask you, Jake, and kind of enlighten us on what's new with logarithms. It's been a while since we had one of these.
Yeah, Mike, that's a great question. A lot has been going on, and we've definitely taken a little bit of a hiatus since our last In the News webinar. And so one of the things I've been working on a lot lately is Logarithm Axon. It's our new SaaS-based product. All things log management, security analytics are in there. The area I've been focusing a lot on is our brand new message parsing or processing engine. Just been working really hard to better understand the ease of use that we're now introducing in Axon for parsing log messages as they come out. And of course, with that is the obvious out-of-the-box content provided by Logarithm is still there. But when we don't support something, how do we add that support, make that user experience positive? So I've been doing a lot of work with that, working closely with our product management team on it too, getting people testing it out, providing feedback, making sure it goes to product and engineering to make it a better product all around. So it's been really fun. What about you, Mike? What have you been working on, or what have you been focusing on with Logarithm lately?
Well, as my name applies in sales, I do help a lot of customers, and more importantly, the partner side of things and the channel. But really, a lot of stuff. Some of it's very complicated, and some of it's pretty standard approach. Helping people out, making sure they get what they need, connecting people here and there. But also, there's a lot of stuff we do behind the scenes that impacts a lot of our customers and a lot of our customer base. But let's go and turn it over to the main topic here. I think the first topic, that is, what were you going to talk about today?
Yeah, Mike, so if you're new to the webinar, Mike and I, we each kind of pick a news article that we find interesting. Obviously, it's going to be security focused, right? So the one I focused in on is one of the more recent LastPass security breaches. The reason I picked this one is because it stood out to me in a couple different ways. First off, let's talk about the incident. Content with the secrets were breached essentially. Attackers got all the hash data as well as some of the details of how to potentially hash some of it. I think the good news is none of it was going to be quick or easy. It's going to be a very slow, long process for them to compromise or decrypt all that data. But a lot of password vaults were taken, and there's a lot of concerns about what to do next. Obviously, LastPass has provided instructions for end users and businesses how to move forward. But let's dive in just a little bit more into this specific scenario. The reason it stood out to me is first because of Plex. Mike, I don't know if you've used Plex before. It's a kind of like a home self-hosted version of Netflix where you can get movies, TV shows, videos, of any type. Obviously, they'd encourage you to do this legally. There's people that use it, for other purposes. But you get those videos, you can store them on a server, and then you can easily stream the videos through Plex. And the cool thing with Plex, of course, is that they roll out new features, new capabilities all the time. So every week, a couple weeks, they're rolling out new patches and enhancements and fixes, things like that. And so this has been going on for years. This is a product that's been around, probably 10 years or so, if not longer. Great tool. But how does this play into LastPass? Well, this is where it gets interesting. There was a senior developer over at LastPass. I read about this on an Android Police News article where they're saying a LastPass senior developer had Plex on his home computer, but did not have the auto updates enabled. And so, of course, like I was just saying, Plex, they roll out features and updates every couple of weeks. The interesting thing is this senior developer's version of Plex was almost 3 years old. 3 years, that's a long time to not do any updates on the software. Now, I'll admit there is that convenience in life of, hey, it just works. Why touch it? Why break it? But it introduces a lot of risk, especially when we're dealing with software development, password management. Now the risk is even bigger. So we got Plex. We got a senior developer with Plex on his home computer. Now, some of the things that weren't super clear, and I'll admit there isn't one straight news article that says, hey, these are all the proven facts. This is me kind of collaborating information from a few different sources, from LastPass's official response, from the hackernews.com. They had an article on this, the Android Police article. But so essentially what I gathered from this is that apparently the senior developer was doing some development work on his home computer. The attackers found a way in through this 3-year-old version of Plex. They're able to do some remote code execution. So they're able to run a Python script to actually install a keylogger on the home computer. And now they're getting captured data. They're starting to see everything he's typing, the person's typing, I should say. I don't know who the developer really was. But now they were able to get access to the corporate level caches, as the article put it. Essentially, you think about it, if you've got a keylogger and you're using that home computer for work purposes, we're going to capture everything. That attacker is going to see everything going on. And sooner or later, we're going to see username, password pop through. We're going to see the credentials that we need. And it's going to make it really easy for the attacker to pop the breach to initiate it. So this introduces a lot of interesting and kind of complicated stuff. But the thing that I absolutely love about this is that it really comes down to a handful of standard practices that are the problem. End user devices, software patching, password management. It's all coming down to some of these simple things. Mike, what do you think about this article or this situation? I know you and I talked about it a little bit, but what's your take? Any thoughts?
No, more of a question. I was wondering with that, I wondered, did the developer using LastPass, did the keylogger capture the master password as well? Did I hear that?
I thought about that too a little bit because, obviously they probably use LastPass. Being a developer, you probably eat your own dog food there. And yeah, if they're typing in that master password and there's a keylogger installed on the system, it's going to get compromised. And so obviously we're making assumptions. I would assume that the developer used LastPass. I'd assume that they use their own product. I'm sure they get it for free. Why not? And probably beta builds too. And so I'm willing to bet that they were using LastPass and that the attackers were able to get that master password key. And now that introduces some new challenges, right? Because that means they're going to get access to the bank information, emails and all that type of stuff. But it's also going to probably include work passwords. And so, once that vault is compromised, once we get access to, once an attacker gets access to it, it's bad news for that user. And in this situation, it was bad news for LastPass as well.
Okay, and yeah, thanks for the answer there. And what are some key takeaways out of this? What do we need to know about what happened here? Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, so I think there's a few things to think about. Number one, organizations need to be very aware of what type of device is connecting into their environment. Remote work has become huge since COVID, right? Many organizations are moving to the remote workforce. We need to be diligent in detecting when a non-corporate device So RDPing, VPNing, logging in through webmail, whatever it is, we need to be aware of that. Now, that's not easy. That's not a quick, simple process. I know in the Logarithm platform, we could do some like trending rules to monitor user authentication and their host origin. But that's not going to be the silver bullet. It's going to be one of the steps. I think a lot of this comes down to that concept of zero trust, right? We need to know how to secure our organization. So if there is a device compromised, it doesn't have access to the kingdom. Number 2 takeaway for me is organizations need to make sure that their fleet of devices have the latest software installed. Again, this isn't a solution Logarithm is going to solve for you. There's tons of products out there, Microsoft Intune, Landesk, whatever, you name it under the sun. But organizations need to make sure that Google Chrome is being updated every day. End user software, all of it needs to be the latest stuff. Even Microsoft Office, if you're using old versions, you're putting the organization at risk because there will be security compromises available in the older versions. Keeping those things up to date is huge. Now, this introduces the challenge here, though. Plex is in a corporate application. The end user's laptop or computer, personal computer, that's not being monitored by the corporate network. Hence why it's so important that we need to be able to watch this stuff. Now, I thought it was kind of interesting. When COVID first started and I started working from home, I was in the office every day until COVID struck. And I started logging in via RDP with multi-factor authentication to some of our work servers. And a little bit later, our IT department actually reached out and they said, hey, we noticed you and a few other people are doing this. We need you to stop. We want you to use the corporate devices. So our organization was actually vigilant. They saw that and they stopped it. They made sure that we're focusing in on corporate equipment so that it can be properly monitored, managed, and maintained. It took me a minute to realize you're absolutely right. I should have been doing it this way. I was creating a security risk. But once I made that change, things were up and up. And honestly, I didn't even notice the difference, right? What's it matter which computer it really is? Mike, I know I'm kind of dragging on here. I have a lot of takeaways. The next one is monitoring for passwords. There's free services like Have I Been Pwned? Logarithm has a smart response where we can actually check. We can see if you have been pwned. And, I think it's one of those things over the next few months, there's always a chance that the passwords that were stolen in this breach could start leaking to the dark web. And so having services like Have I Been Pwned, and I'm sure there's plenty of other paid services that I don't know off the top of my head that you can leverage to monitor for those. But that plays into the next one, password policies. It's really important to make sure that you have an effective password policy. Now, I'm not going to give you the policy that you should have for your organization. Microsoft has some suggestions. There's a lot of different concepts and ideas out there. But the one thing I think is really important that you regularly have password recycles. Now, does that mean every 30 days they should be changing their password? Of course not. We don't want to make end users do that. That's how we're going to end up with passwords on the screen on a sticky note. It should be something frequent, 3-4 months quarterly. That's not asking too much. Every 6 months, that's reasonable. Figure out what's right for your organization, for your end users. But if you have a good password policy, it's going to be less of a risk because over the next few weeks and months, as these passwords could start to leak, hopefully the passwords have already been cycled in your organization. Last thing I want to call out is the idea. I think SOX compliance knocks this out of the park pretty well, but you got to secure production. And when I say secure, it doesn't just mean from attackers. You need to secure it from engineers. Engineers shouldn't have the full access to security keys, API keys into the production environment of a software company. They should be able to deploy to it, but there should be some level of separation so that they don't have full access to get this type of data set from the production databases. Very important, very tricky, very hard. There's a fine line to dance there of we're going in to troubleshoot things, understand the bugs so that we can resolve them versus keeping them out from being able to access secure data. Mike, I know that was a lot in terms of my key takeaways, but what do you think? Any of those stand out to you? I feel like a lot of it is kind of standard security hygiene, though.
I was just going to mention it seems like those classic hygiene use cases that you need to be mindful of. But maybe the last question is: do you think what you researched there? Do you think a YubiKey or some sort of offline MFA tool would have prevented this incident?
I'm gonna say yes and no. I don't know enough how they work, but if you put a YubiKey in and it's using virtual keyboard or something to type in the codes, there's a chance the keylogger still could have grabbed that. Now, granted, YubiKeys or even like Android or iPhone MFAs, they're generating time-based codes. And so the attacker might have a very small window if they get that YubiKey code or from your phone. Might be a really small window, but there's still a chance that it would allow for that type of incident to occur. Now, of course, with that, if you're using proper practice with this stuff, you put your YubiKey in, authenticate, and disconnect. If you're leaving your YubiKey in, that's where we can start to see some security concerns. But I will admit, I am not a YubiKey expert. That's just my interpretation, my thoughts on the process.
All right. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it was actually really interesting. And again, it kind of hit home, having my experience where IT called me out for using a personal computer a little bit, as well as, I know a lot of people that use Plex, and it's one of those things that it hits close to home. And it made me really intrigued because also it's really common, I think, for software developers to not think that they're going to be the victim of a security incident. I mean, I'm a sales engineer. I'm in security all the time. I like to think I'm not going to be the victim either. But reality is, you and I, Mike, we can be victims of this. They could get some detailed information about logarithm through us if they really wanted to. Granted, I don't have full access to our databases, our code base, things like that. So it'd be limited attack vectors, but there's still compromise that can occur, and would be really unfortunate. But Mike, that's all I have about LastPass. Do you have any last thoughts, or should we move on?
Let's move on. I think that was good time on that topic, and it is very informative and it's very important because I used to use LastPass as well. I've since moved on to something else that I won't disclose. But let's move on to the next topic, and I want to cover something that, like you were mentioning, Jake. Sometimes you can't avoid that. It's going to happen. It's just sometimes in the hands of someone else where your security is vulnerable. In this case, T-Mobile was in the news recently, rather in January. It's been a little bit of time, but this is important. I know it's a couple months old, but this is really important for us security experts, people who need to be in the know, and more importantly, what services are being taken care of from these mobile giants like T-Mobile. So through research, I found that over the last 5 years, T-Mobile has been hacked by many cyber criminals, and they're not really quiet about that. They love boasting about that on Telegram groups. 3 of them mentioned in the particular articles I was reading, all over the span of 2022. And by the way, over the span of 2022, they were breached over 100 times, 107 if I think I read that correctly.
Mike, what? 100 times?
In just 1 year. And they publicly announced in these Telegram chat groups where they would scream T-Mobile up, or T-Mo up for short, to announce that they've got access to employee credentials. And I'll get into the details about how they got in. But
now, I just gotta say, I feel bad for that security team. Obviously, T-Mobile has security. They're trying, but that's hard, man. Could you imagine responding to 100 incidents in 1 year on top of everything else? That's intense.
Yeah, it is. And unfortunately, again, this is in the hands of the security teams. We're putting the trust into T-Mobile or any of our mobile devices, whoever's governing all the services in the background, right? In this case, when T-Mobile was approached and asked about this by Creds on security, they did not confirm or deny any of the intrusions, the claimed intrusions, but in a written statement, T-Mobile said that this type of activity is affecting the entire wireless industry, which is a little bit of a cop-out, if you put it that way. More importantly, I think what was asked of, what are you doing to protect your customers? And then in January 2023, T-Mobile disclosed that a bad actor did indeed steal records of roughly 37 million customers. And that was their name, their billing address, email, birthday, phone number, and T-Mobile account number. That's not to mention that back in, I think, 2018, 41 million records were leaked. And that was bad enough as it was. So the fact that it keeps happening is very concerning. But fortunately, there are some mitigation efforts that took place to keep this from happening over and over again. And to answer the question how they got in, most of this was either phishing and sometimes email, sometimes it was a phone conversation. These people were, these cyber criminals were hacking them by researching them. They did these whole research online. They're looking for the big people, right? They're looking for the whales, if you will, people who have a lot to lose, like millions in crypto, or for example, maybe sensitive information that could really damage their reputation. That's stuff that these hackers were going after. And then once they had the information for the SIM swapping service, so this is exactly what they're doing, is they're swapping the SIMs or SIM swapping. And what that does is it redirects all the SIM data that initially goes to a customer's phone and redirects it to a hacked phone. That way they can steal credentials and see everything. Their entire digital life is now published on another phone that's not theirs.
Mike, I got to say, I'm happy I don't have millions in crypto. Would make me an easy target, right? What do you think? What do you think they did to avoid detection? The attackers, I should say.
Yeah, they did. They're very complex in this approach. So as I was going through the research here, there's a cyber security firm called Unit 221B, excuse me, and they found out that they weren't just low-level risk attacks. These were really complex, very methodical in their approach. They had complex, cyber criminals who build the scripts, both scripts for the technology and then for the social engineering aspect. And then even when they stole stuff, they had a middleman to process transactions, so that way each of the hacker groups didn't scam each other. So it's really funny to hear about that. But how they really avoided detection was they were very crafty in spinning up and spinning down websites that looked like the internal corporate tools, and to avoid detection. So I'm sorry, you're going to ask a question.
Yeah, no. That was really interesting. Very good insight. There's actually one of our viewers asked a question. They said Google Fi uses T-Mobile and AT&T carriers. Is there a risk that those customers were impacted as well? Do we know? Obviously, we're not carrier experts, but what do you think about those opportunities?
I would say yes. There's some concern there. I would say because they do what's called leasing of different carrier lines. So if it traverses those particular cell phone towers, if you will, yeah, I would see that as being a slight threat, because if it traverses their networks or backhaul, I would say that there's some questions over my head. I would say, am I indeed safe here? I would want to ask, what's being done to protect.
Because I have a feeling like the billing data isn't going to overlap, and so that type of content is probably secured. But absolutely, to Mike's point, there will be some sort of reference data into the T-Mobile and AT&T carriers, and then once they're on those networks, there's that risk as well. So that's good insight, Mike. Mike, do you have more to share? Do you want to jump into kind of your takeaways on this?
Yeah, I want to back up and just give a little bit of good news here. Is as of today,
I'll slow down. Sorry, man.
No, that's okay. I'm just going to say that I also know that it was called out that T-Mobile claims that there are no known active bad actors in their internal network. I mean, that's tough to really say at this point, given the history and the track record that we've been seeing. Another thing is we know that this isn't just T-Mobile being hacked. It's happening to all the major carriers out there, so AT&T and Verizon. But I did see that T-Mobile is the most attacked, far more. They're selling these SIM swapping services for anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500, whereas AT&T or Verizon accounts are charging double the amount. But my takeaways for the topic here are the attackers were able to trick the T-Mobile employees into providing company credentials, and then those credentials were essentially ephemeral, where they would last maybe only a couple hours, in some cases a couple days, a few days, and then it would get shut down because they detected them. But the other takeaway here is user education. It seems to be the classic case of, did you click the wrong link in an email? Did you fall for a social engineering trick? Are APIs being hardened? And this is an important one, because this is something that not a lot of folks are really doing, and it's not a very commonplace thing. Your APIs are very critical. So good hygiene is to use variables for your API tokens whenever you're making calls. There are services out there offered by Imperva, Akamai, Cloudflare to harden your APIs as well. Lean on that stuff. It's important we look at that. And yeah, that's the stuff I would take away from there.
Mike, you make API hardening sound like it should be standard practice. I feel like that's something that's commonly overlooked because it's not easy, right? It's a very critical service, and it can create a lot of difficulty or challenges for people to implement or use your APIs when you're doing that. But I'll also throw out that there's a ton of value in logging your API activities. For the most part, APIs run on web servers, right? And so we should be able to send all the API activity, all that event data into the logarithm SIM for processing and collaboration, as well as just like maintain that data. So if the attacker does compromise a server and clear logs, at least it's still contained within the logarithm platform.
Yeah, that's right. And that's exactly what I was going to bring up next is how logarithm could help here. And I mentioned a few technologies, a few vendors that are out there that are not just not logarithm, but it's, we know where we sit inside the cybersecurity stack. We are there to help you. So once those logs are brought in from a third party or another security vendor, we can take those logs, log them in with chain of custody. So that way for litigation efforts, you can bring that to the courts or bring that to law enforcement. So it is important we call those out.
Yeah.
And thank you for calling out NDR. We also have UEBA, which that does help quite a bit in understanding what your users are doing, because once they start getting a little bit, iffy, or if they're starting to perform different behavior that's not typical of them, that's going to be tracked inside of UEBA. So user entity behavior analytics is something that's important here.
All right. Now, wait, I didn't jump into NDR yet. Will you explain that one a little bit more, how that would benefit here?
Yeah, so NDR is important, or network detection and remediation or response. That's important because the network doesn't lie, right? Once you track all the changes, yes, the hacker can do all sorts of tricks, but the network never lies. Once something has been modified, if the payload's been altered, or maybe there's a non-standard protocol, we'll be able to capture that with an NDR. And that's offered by Logarithm as well, but there are many NDRs out there too. But that's just one way to track this sort of attack.
Yeah, the other thing I'll pile on, NDR, very valuable. The phrase I've heard is EDR can be disabled, endpoint monitoring can be disabled, logs can be cleared, but the attacker has to traverse the network to get data in and out.
Right.
And so it is a good way to get that visibility, regardless if it's in the cloud, on-prem, virtual. NDR could be there to help be a security metric to help detect and respond. So really love that. The other thing I was thinking about, Mike, is UEBA. I think that's such an interesting topic. Excuse me. UEBA is powerful, right? We're going to build some models, monitor user activity. The thing I love with Logarithm UEBA is it's a log source back into our SIM. It's not a standalone product. It's really supposed to be able to build up and enhance the SIM's insight into activities. And the reason I say that is because, if Mike started logging in from a foreign location at weird times, our UEBA would start to say, hey, Mike's activity is causing him to be suspicious. We're going to raise his risk level or risk score. And we'll feed that into the SIM. So then when Mike starts accessing random files, we now say, hey, this is a risky user accessing files, not just, hey, we have some user named Mike that's hitting a bunch of file servers. It's going to increase finding that needle in the haystack, make it more reliable, more actionable results, rather than just saying, oh, hey, we saw Mike doing something weird, we want you to investigate it. It's going to help really fine tune that experience, make it more effective for the security analysts on the team. So I think that's a really good call out, Mike. NDR and UEBA, merging all that data into the SIM, great way to get visibility. Now we have network data, we have user data, we also have all that log data, right? All the API activity, like we were just talking about. Now we can get a much more clear picture of what's going on.
Yeah, and excuse me while I drink. This is actually water, I promise you.
Yeah, whiskey, that's what we call water now, right?
Yes.
All right, Mike, last question for you. Well, actually, I have two more questions. The first one is related. The next one's not. Where do you think T-Mobile's going to go next from here?
Yeah, good question, because one thing as I was going through these articles is I didn't see T-Mobile promise one thing that was glaringly obvious what they need to do. They did not mention, hey, rather they mentioned we're going to enhance API protection, we're going to enhance networking protection, we're going to enhance credential access. But what I didn't see is user education as part of the enhancements to their security posture. That's just that's a huge miss in my mind. It is something that they did say we have reassessed all of our users, of our employees, what they're doing, tracking them a little bit better. But something else that was called out in some of the comments section was, what about UB keys? This would be a provable way to stop a lot of these attacks. They're very effective in that. Researchers in California did mention you guys could be using this stuff and it would effectively stop all these attacks the way that they're committing these. So that's the last thing I think T-Mobile should be taking away. But it was unfortunate to see that they didn't mention user education.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Both of these topics. First off, I have to say both are big companies. They are obviously investing in security already, but it comes down to so many simple, basic tactics. I can't imagine what it'd be like to work at one of these companies, thousands of employees, so many attack vectors there. User education is so critical, but it's not going to be effective for everybody. Everybody has different learning paths and styles. Know before or whatever you use might not always be effective for across the entire organization. So it makes it a big challenge. It's a moving target. It's a difficult one to solve. So you and I were easy, right? We're on the sell side saying, hey, user education, buy some software. Reality is implementation is hard and it's a never-ending challenge. I always say that security is an iterative process. It's not a deploy and done. It's a deploy, review, update, tweak, review, update, tweak. It's a never-ending process. And the reason being, you have attrition, you have users coming and going, you have software that's constantly being updated, you have new security vectors. The security landscape is constantly changing. It's not quick and easy. It's a never-ending battle. So well, it's easy for us to come and talk about these and point out things that organizations can do. I have to give them credit. Both these organizations have to be trying, and it's got, obviously this is a hit to their reputation. It's a hit to the user base that's using these products and being impacted. But I hope at the end of the day, all of us can learn from this, that we can be better and find those small steps that we can iteratively implement so that we can do better. Whether that's buying a security solution. Oh, hey, Sim, Logarithm's here to talk. But it also could be user education. It could just be, sitting down and saying, hey, we need to set a hard password policy and enforce it. It could be those small steps. It doesn't require a purchase. It just requires a couple of hours of focus and dedication from a team. So I hope the takeaway here is that security is a challenge for big and small organizations. We all need to make the investment, protect our customers, and let's learn from one another as we go through these challenges. Mike, before I ask the last question, do you have any closing thoughts or remarks?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And yeah, I think you're kind of taking a jab back at me and saying, hey, Mike, that's not fair. It's tough to implement that stuff. You're absolutely right. You're totally right. There's no one organization that is 100% bulletproof. That's just not true. I don't think it ever will be for quite some time. I don't think that in our world that's ever going to be the case. That's why we sit where we sit, right, Jake? But yeah, zero trust would be something that I would say it would be a great factor to put in place once they do assess. T-Mobile assesses what happened there, or even LastPass or Plex. Everyone needs a good zero trust model, especially if you're mostly hosted in the cloud. It's really good to do that on an on-prem solution as well. But yeah, I think that's the final thought. Anything else we want to cover?
Yeah, Mike, there's one last question. I'm going to go back to the first slide. One of the viewers asked, is Mike trying to look like Jake with his beard?
That was the situation. I was going to call out that I went from baby face to man face Mike. But yes, I'm trying. I can't quite compete. His is pretty stellar. So it's finally caught up a little bit, but it's not quite the top tier that he has.
Let me just say, you definitely have to go through an ugly beard phase to get to this. It wasn't always pretty. Some might say it's not pretty yet still. So
I would say that I'm still getting past the itchy part.
It's a real challenge. Well, Mike, this has been fun. I love, obviously you and I, we talk all the time, right? We're both working in supporting partners in logarithm related items, But I think it's great to be able to sit down, take a few minutes, talk with one another about security. Like we were just talking about, it's easy to say, it's hard to do. And so I hope the takeaway that our viewers get from this is that we need to find those small challenges to overcome and just do it one step at a time. We're not going to solve security in one day. This isn't like world peace. We can't just sit down at a summit and walk away and have world peace. No, I guess that doesn't work that way either, right? The reality is security is an ever-evolving challenge that we're all going to have to work to. By the way, somebody did just post a comment. Yes, Google Fi was impacted. There's a PC Mag article that does talk about how customers are caught up in the T-Mobile breach from that. So really appreciate whoever submitted that. I don't get to see names. I just see the comments. So thank you for feeding that into us. We appreciate that insight.
Yeah, thank you. Love the interaction. And these are always fun to do because it's not just education and just letting you know what's happening, but we're letting you be aware of, just how complicated these attacks are. And I don't need to remind everybody, hey, you need to do your due diligence and do your research. It's really complicated. I think that's the recurring theme we have here on this call. But
it's complicated, but there's those small steps that we can do. Password policy, update software. It's easy to say, oh man, this is overwhelming, but it's also easy to start to say, well, let's focus on the one small piece we can do today, right?
Yeah, it's marginal efforts there. I couldn't think of the words. They weren't quite coming out, but
marginal efforts. You're absolutely right there. That's a good one. By the way, Mike, speaking of marginal efforts, the question about the beard, we got some feedback. It is something to shoot for. You can do it, Mike. Don't give up on growing that beard.
I'm working on it. We'll see where it goes. I'm getting some of the grays already. I'm starting to get the salt and pepper effect.
Oh yeah, it's coming in for me too. All right, we're starting to go into beards. I'll start talking about beard oils next. So we better wrap up. Thank you everybody for joining us today. This has been fun, Mike. I love chatting with you. It's always good to get your insight. It's fun because sometimes we butt heads on some of these ideas, but it's always fun that we can come out with an agreement at the end of the day, right?
As we should. This is important.
All right, we better pass it back to Eileen to wrap us up.
Of course. Thank you so much, Jake and Mike. And thank you for sharing your expertise. Always a pleasure to have you on and have your beers on as well. We hope it was valuable to you. And if you have any other questions that you'd like to chat with us later on in your day, feel free to email us at info@logarithm.com. Mike and Jake will be more than happy to answer your questions. And as a final reminder, make sure to check out the attachment section of this page for extra resources. They'll remain available even once we bring this webcast to a close. Also, please do follow us on social media to keep on top of upcoming announcements, events, and our next episode in the news part 6. Our social medias are on this screen. Thanks again, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Jake and Mike.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.